Cool, we're underway. Morena koutou katoa. Thank you everyone for joining us again for another interview. Today we've got the CEO of Nelson Tasman Chamber of Commerce, Ali Boswijk. Morena, Ali.
Morena.
Thanks for taking the time. Ali and I have been talking a bit over the last couple of weeks as we try and kind of navigate the relentless pace at which all of this has taken place and support your members. You must have had a fairly big couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's been busy to be sure. I think the first week, well, from sort of Wednesday when everybody hit lockdown to sort of the weekend seemed to take forever. And now suddenly this week has just sped by. I think everybody's now just much more in a rhythm and they're at home. And so, yeah, lots of questions, lots of conversations.
Yeah, that's what I've been hearing as well. So for all the businesses that I've been talking to, they were very relieved that the government made the call and for complete support around the lockdown and total understanding. And that as soon as that clarity kicked in, I think the week prior of feeling like it was all happening, but still needing to make kind of voluntary decisions about closure and how to deal with staff and things, was a really confusing time for people. And the lockdown has given some clarity on how to progress. And I'm still losing track of what day it is. I don't know about you, but I'm still.
It's actually Friday.
Friday. I feel like it was Friday quite recently, though.
Yeah, I worked that out this morning. No, you're absolutely right. And I think that the thing, and talking with, a lot of us connect with friends and family overseas at the moment, because that's naturally what you do. And the fact that actually the decision is so direct, it's unequivocal. This is what's happening. There's no discussion. There's some slight grey areas around particular businesses, but we can probably come to that. But in actual fact, we know what's happening. And I think that the staging, coming from a comms background, I'm sure you spotted that as soon as it was done as well. As soon as you got 4 stages, you're going to level 4 at some point. So actually having that really clearly articulated was fantastic. And I think it gave everybody clarity. And I suspect a lot of people probably slept a lot better as soon as we knew what was happening. Then other issues would keep us awake. But initially, I think we probably all had at least one good night's sleep. So
Yeah, absolutely agree. Let's just pick up on one point there. So there has been a lot of confusion circulating, even on the group that we've established around essential versus non-essential businesses and who qualifies. My kind of interpretation is the government kind of dropped the curtain as quickly and as hard as possible and have started working their way back from there rather than keeping it open like other countries have and locking down slowly. There has been a bit of there have been some changes throughout in terms of access to some essential services. What's your advice for businesses who feel like they're on the fence at the moment?
I think the main thing is just to keep on going back to those official sources because they are changing literally daily. The MB website with the list of essential services is quite helpful, though it is in sort of quite government speak, naturally. We're certainly doing that and we're trying to sort of communicate as quickly as we can with people who've got specific questions. It is difficult because I think you're right, that the way that it was done is it had to come down hard and fast. And then it's like, okay, so now we can move that back a layer and back a layer and back a layer. And you're actually seeing a little bit of loosening. But what that does is it creates grey areas, which is what we're seeing, particularly around sort of provision of, fruit and vegetables and things that are grown locally. And so it's really a question of how we can, I guess, feed back up to government, which we're doing regularly in terms of these are the pressure points, this is what's happening. Maybe this could change. At the moment, we're certainly not in a position to make any change, but we can certainly inform to try and influence change around some areas. But it is hard, and it's the thing that's probably going to continue to be the hardest thing as we move through this, because some businesses are working, admittedly in constrained circumstances, but they're working, and some are just not. And that's difficult. There's no easy answer to any of that.
No, but I do get the sense of, as the week has kind of progressed and we've got our heads around it, that there is a strong kind of undercurrent at the moment of wanting to support local businesses, particularly those who are handling fresh produce and have goods ready to go, of going, actually, throughout this lockdown period, we need to be as safe and as cautious as possible, and no one could be blamed for being overly cautious at the moment at all, but also recognising that with the money that's in circulation right now, it would be really good to support our local businesses as well.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that I've discussed with a few people, and I'm kind of just sort of formulating my ideas clearly on it, but it's how we actually do influence and get supermarkets to use locals in their supply chain, and how we actually start to integrate that local supply in a way that it potentially hasn't before because of the nature and the distribution of how those big supermarkets work. But actually we're a food producing region. We've got great food. We need to be able to get that to people in a way, and for producers to be able to get access to that new distribution for them, and for the supply chains to be loosened up as supermarkets. So we're just sort of trying to really look at that and see how that can develop. That has to be the way forward.
Mm.
We can't shut out our suppliers if we can find a way to get them in. It's just mad.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so for anyone confused about the grey area, the best resources that what MB is releasing and constantly updating, and
At the
being in
moment
touch.
it is. That's kind of our go-to. And if we're not getting a clear answer from that ourselves, or somebody comes up with something completely left field, then we are going directly to MB to see if we can get an answer. And we are getting them. It's just not instant. It's not like, instant return of email. We're waiting for sort of up to 2 to 3 days sometimes. Not surprisingly. I mean, they're fielding a lot of inquiries.
Oh, I don't envy any government bureaucrats at the moment at all.
Have I ever envied them? Not sure.
No, never really. The paper
They're
trail,
lovely.
man, the paper trail behind this will be really big.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the other really pressing thing that's I think is coming up for people is that there's been some inconsistency at the speed of which the wage subsidy has been applied, and I know that MSD did manage to get communications out to people this week who are waiting and saying that please bear with us. Obviously that scheme has been really well subscribed to, but there are also businesses in this region that I'm aware of who are in the position of now running out of cash reserves to get money to their staff and still waiting. What would your advice be for them?
I mean, I think the main thing is if you're still waiting, then, again, just stay in touch with them. Don't just sit back and wait to be told. We've had a couple of instances whereby people have got in touch with us, and it turns out there's like one little anomaly in the application, but because the number of applications is so high, they're probably not being dealt with immediately as they ordinarily would. So they're probably being just left to be dealt with later. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case, but we've certainly been able to get quite speedy responses to people just by going in some different routes if we've discovered that that's the case. So I just think it's don't give up. I mean, don't give up being proactive. I think that's the main thing. I think, interestingly, the majority of people who I've talked to have been getting it within sort of now 5 to 10 working days. Mm. Initially, it really was swift. We had some instances where people were literally getting it overnight. And now, obviously, that's slowing down as more and more people are using it. And particularly since they've lifted the cap on the $150,000, I think that's encouraged much bigger businesses to also do it, and that's a lot of people to process. So I think that's part of it. But I think it's probably be patient, but also be slightly impatient. Don't just sit back and wait for it to happen. If that was me, I would be certainly being proactive and following up as much as possible.
And Grant Robertson did a great interview the other day that I posted in the group with regards to, I think, was a really clear interpretation of the wage subsidy and the kind of bottom lines. And obviously, I think he acknowledged they're operating on a high trust model. They're prioritising speed at the moment versus some detail. With regards to a lot of questions I've had this week have been about the wage subsidy and employment law as well. So recognising that right now, if you're a cafe owner, you're getting a wage subsidy, but the prospects of being able to keep everyone employed are actually not that high. How do you recommend people kind of contend with that at the moment?
I mean, I think the main thing is to remember that you always have to act within the law, that we're getting money quickly, but that doesn't change the situation and the way that we actually have to deal with employees. So if you're an employer, you have to be mindful of that at all times, as you would ordinarily anyway. So I think the main thing is to probably seek good advice on that. And I'm not an employment law expert by any stretch of the imagination. And if I was in that situation, I would absolutely be seeking advice. But so the main thing is to know that you can't just change people's working circumstances without going through a process to do that. And whether that's reducing hours or whether that's tending towards actually having to let staff go, you have to go through the correct process in order to do that. And staff just need to also, communication, as we all know, is the key. I think that's one of the main things, is actually just to keep talking to people. Everybody's aware that the situation is difficult for everybody, but they all bring it back to themselves. So it's just always making sure you're staying communicating, you're staying connected with staff so that they know exactly what's going on at all times. It's nothing like a nasty surprise to make you feel really bad.
Exactly, and I think it's an important point, because one thing that I've had to keep kind of discussing with employers this week is just reminding them that it's not a problem of their doing, because a lot of them are carrying the load on behalf of their staff, which is admirable, and I have a complete understanding and respect for that, but understanding that everyone is in this position, and that we are in a new kind of unprecedented way, all of this together, and so they have to be kind of able at the moment to have really honest conversations conversations with staff, but
Mm,
also getting the sense of I think it's important at the moment that people aren't anticipating problems before they've happened.
exactly.
This has been so fast, and the people who have responded the best of the ones who I think have taken a deep breath and actually made good, sound, strategic decisions and dealt with what's coming at them on the day rather than what's coming at them in 12 weeks. And right now, there is a wage subsidy. It's pretty well flagged that it will be extended in some form. And so as it stands, whilst there are implications and conversations to be had right now, you're not expected to tell your staff at this point or make any promises around what employment looks like in 6 months. Your kind of immediate obligation is to keep people employed via the wage subsidy and whatever other means you can, and be honest with them. But ultimately, don't anticipate problems or make decisions right now, because we're still only in the first week, essentially.
Exactly, and I think that's really important to remember, that what you said about the fact that it's not of people's doing. This has happened,
Yeah.
and it's happened. If you think about some of the most successful companies, in our country, I mean, that are actually going to suffer massively because of this, and they've been very, very successful. So you look at something like Air New Zealand. I mean, they're not exactly an unsuccessful company, and where they're sitting right now. So it's completely outside of, it's the ultimate threat, isn't it? It's that big external threat that nobody, well, we saw coming at some point. Clearly, we probably knew something like this was going to happen. But it's like anything, you prepare to a point, but you don't prepare it fully, because actually you don't really think it's going to happen. So yeah, no, the main thing is absolutely to understand that, and to remember that when it's hard, which is easier said than done, because obviously we all take on that responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've been encouraging people to kind of double down on their emotional leadership that they're showing for their team and for their customers. And I've seen some businesses doing a really good job of that. One of our clients, who is one of the ones on the front line, being super affected, and the long-term prospects not being that bright for where they're sitting either, has done an incredible job of bringing their customers and staff closer to them than ever before. And I got an email from them this morning, which was a summary of all the feedback they've received from people who have travelled with them over the past 5 years from all around the world, who have loved diving back into their New Zealand memories and videos and photos, and now they're all sharing with each other, and they've brought their customers together in a way that we've always thought would be a good idea, but this has been the catalyst for it. And so operationally, the way their business survives, it's really hard to know whether that has a future, or is going to work in the next kind of 12 to 24 months. But in terms of the brand and the reputation and the audience and everything they've built, that is more solid than ever before, and so that gives them the opportunity to pivot.
Yeah, completely, and that's what people need to be doing. We've seen some really interesting pivots happening locally with some businesses, particularly around the manufacture of PPE, so the personal protective equipment, and a couple of businesses that have moved very quickly into that space, which is great. And they've now, been authorised by MB to produce it. So we're seeing that locally we've got a supply of that, which is fantastic for those people who are working on those frontline essential services and supermarkets and places like that. So we don't have to wait. We've got people locally producing it who weren't producing that, 6 weeks ago. So that's really good, how people are already starting to move into those spaces and see that demand, so they can maintain some element of their business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there's been a lot of talk about, I mentioned in the group, there's been a lot of talk about how these are unprecedented times. And one thing that's definitely occurred to me this week is recognizing that we shouldn't buy into that too much, because actually as businesses, we are used to a lot of change and a lot of disruption, and industries have been wiped out through things like digital disruption, that really strong and well-established industries and large companies and things. This has come at a pace that is unprecedented, and that's why it's so important to stop and make good, sound, strategic decisions, and not kind of get ahead of yourself, but recognizing that people are very adaptable. Look at us; most of us are now at home, and a couple of weeks ago we didn't see that coming, and a month ago I don't think any of us saw any of it coming, really.
Look,
and here we are.
I know how to set up a webinar now. Come on.
Yeah.
I know how to record a Zoom meeting.
yeah, exactly. And I think, on that note as well, it's been important, you and I have talked about it, but recognizing that if you're working from home at the moment, then the boundaries between home life and work life have never been more blurred. And I think it's important. I think you said at one of our first calls, trying to remember that just because you're at home working doesn't mean you're always working.
See, I can't answer that question now, because my husband's in this office with me, and he will just laugh and snort when I make any response to that. Because as he said to me last night, it's great now you've got a home office. That means you can just work more.
Yeah. It does feel like that.
It does, unfortunately. And I think the trouble is we're kind of in triage mode at the moment still. So it's really just getting through this initial kind of time. And then hopefully things will settle down into being, we keep saying the new normal, but the new normal sadly keeps changing on a daily basis. So I'm not quite sure what that looks like. But it is important. And I think, we're limited to where we can go and what we can do, obviously. But certainly the downside about Zoom and having all these electronic meetings, you do spend all day looking at a screen and having meetings instead of sitting and having a coffee with somebody, which I was quite inclined to do before, but like that aspect. So it just means that you just have to think about things differently and step away from the screen whenever you can. Sadly, I had a day yesterday where that wasn't possible, and it was a pretty knackering day.
Yeah, it is. Just a reminder for people to take care of themselves. Like yesterday I had a really big day lined up as well, and our internet stopped working at some point in the morning, and I thought, oh, not now. We don't need internet issues at the moment, but it turns out it's exactly what I needed. I just went for a walk along the beach, cancelled the meeting. The sky didn't really fall in; it was okay. It's we're picking up it on again today, and I went for a great walk on the beach, and actually it was overdue anyway.
Exactly.
So it was a good little nudge in the right direction.
Yeah, I had a similar moment the other day when I turned on my Outlook and it just wouldn't load, and I could feel myself getting slightly anxious. And in that time, I sort of got on my phone and I was working out all the things I could do on my phone. I thought, this is ridiculous. It's all of 2 minutes, of course, and it was perfectly fine. But I had all those things lined up that I was going to do, which, you clearly, you want to do as much as you can, but you only do what you can, really.
Exactly.
I always had to start the day with this great plan of what I'm thinking about in terms of, future planning and everything else. By email 2, I'm completely derailed.
Yeah, totally.
All over.
I want to just kind of, in wrapping up, actually have a chat about kind of casting our minds forward. So I think everyone appreciates at the moment that whilst the economic and social impact right now of going into lockdown is really severe, that people are generally quite accepting of it and can foresee that it will put New Zealand in a reasonably strong position in terms of having the capacity to eliminate the virus, which a lot of countries that's not possible anymore. What is your kind of outlook at the moment as it stands, recognizing it's always changing, on where we sit kind of as a country and then even down to where we are as Te Tauihu and Nelson, Tasman?
I mean, I think, all of us, our glass balls, are a little bit cloudy at the moment in terms of what we're seeing. But I think there are some positive things that we can see already. I mean, the fact that we know that food from New Zealand is always well regarded, and particularly if we can keep a lid on this virus, it just adds to that whole brand positioning of New Zealand as a place that the food that comes from here is good, it's healthy, it's all of the things that we want it to be. So I think from that perspective, we're in a really strong position to be able to capitalize on that at some point in the future in a bigger sense than we are at the moment. But I think we're seeing a bit of that already, obviously, with the fruit season coming into being, and we know that the meat industry is doing reasonably well as well at the moment. So those sorts of things. I think from a tourism perspective, New Zealanders love to travel. So they'll still travel, but they'll travel domestically because actually they'll have no choice. And so we're positioned to be able to actually take advantage of that as well, then, which we are. I mean, we understand how to host tourists. We understand what that means. And actually we're in a position to, back our backyard really well. And I think that that's something that we can start moving towards. I mean, there definitely will be some people that don't come out of this, for sure. I've seen some already, and you'll have seen some already.
Yeah.
But I think those ones that are actually strong and get through this will probably be far more resilient to future impacts because they'll be prepared for it, and will be able to really think differently about how they operate. So I think, it's always hard to see a positive at this point in time, but I think it's about having that eye on the kind of short term, mid-term, long term, and thinking about it's an opportunity to reset a few things as well, particularly around tourism. Actually, how many people do we want coming to this country? How many people do we want coming to the region? What sort of tourists do we want to encourage? Tourists, they've had a bit of a bad rap recently in some areas in terms of the way some tourists are behaving when they're here. So actually, how can we use that as an opportunity to actually take back and become that, that country again that people really see in that 100% pure, not to use that, it's a bit hackneyed now, but in fact, I don't love it at all. But, to get back to that sort of, that space of people seeing New Zealand for a place it is. And I think, what's happening at a government level is helping that as well, because it's not going unnoticed that New Zealand is doing this. They're taking it seriously. They are being that, very definite in the way that we're dealing with it, and that stands us in good stead for future relationships with people, because they know that we're doing that, and we're not clouding the issue for political end.
Yeah, that's totally. I mean, I watched the Parliamentary Select Committee the other day, and I thought it was phenomenal. I thought, oh, this is how Parliament should always work. Why do they all need to get together? Actually, but it was just really, it was very kind and deliberate and respectful and productive, and people were coming at it from completely different ends of the political spectrum in terms of response. You know, you had people like David Seymour kind of almost saying that we shouldn't be intervening really at all, through to Martima Davidson talking about needing to get on with welfare urgently. But it was held in a context that was very respectful and very productive dialogue for the country, and I think that has come from the top down. And we lost a family member last week, as you know, and had to navigate what that means in a lockdown. And the kind of response that we got from people was indicative of that leadership. I think I think people really went out of their way at every level where we rubbed up against some of these restrictions that seemed really difficult to deal with. People were very kind, and I think as a country we're in an interesting space to explore that identity more, with the leadership we have in place, and the kind of prospects for the country in terms of reputation and brand, and what this will do for us. I think there's some really interesting upside and opportunity for New Zealand there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You said it well. I'm not going to repeat it.
Good, nice. I just on the domestic tourism front, because here locally, obviously food and fibre being massive, and not unaffected, but certainly the prospects for that are reasonably positive. And we've had two major industries here in New Zealand that have been our main export industries, tourism and food, and it's obvious now that tourism is going to be quite severely impacted. It will matter for our local area. Domestic tourism is one of the big emerging opportunities. I know for all the tourism operators we've worked with, one of the things we have battled the hardest with is trying to get people to come to Nelson for the weekend rather than go to Fiji and rather than go to the Gold Coast and all those things. So that has completely changed overnight, and the opportunity for domestic tourism is very strong. One of the things I would say is that it does require, for any operator at the moment, all of our the marketing you have and the products you have in place are designed around international tourism, because it's the highest spend. And so it is time for operators who are looking for a bounce back plan for next season, and recognising that international tourism will not be back to normal next season, to start thinking about actually pivoting on their products as well to suit more of a domestic market.
Completely. And that probably comes down across exactly what they're providing and price point. There'll be all sorts of things that need to be looked at as part of that. Yeah.
Totally. And it just occurred to me that you held a very timely conference last year. We'll be ready to pivot.
Yeah. Hey, and we had one lined up this year called Keep Calm and Act Now. Bit late now.
A webinar maybe.
Yeah, well, no, I'm seriously thinking about doing something. I'm coming to grips with this whole the Zoom world of Zoom, and how you can actually set up a conference and have breakout sessions. There's a whole lot of functionality around this, which I'm just coming to grips with. So watch this space. You never know. We may still do something yet, but it'll have quite a different focus, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So that's kind of a good note to finish on. What are the resources, just for people listening, particularly those in the Nelson Tasman region? What are the kind of resources and support people can expect from the Chamber, and what's kind of coming on stream?
I mean, the main thing is we've got moved into this webinar space, as I say. So literally within 6 days, and that included a weekend, we went from never having done one before to now having a platform in place. And we had 2 this morning, I think, actually, one on business continuity and cash flow planning with Mallet McLean, and one for exporters with a company called Catapult, who do a lot of export essentials. So we had 2, and we did one. We've got some coming up on mental health next week. In fact, we've got a whole series. I'm not going to reel through them all, but we've got on our events page where you can see them and register them. They're all free, of course. So that's something we're doing a lot of. We're still doing a lot of one-to-one discussions with people. Had our first social event last night, so did our first little BA5. People brought their own glass of wine or cup of tea or whatever they wanted, and we'll do more of that, because there are a lot of people who are naturally sociable and they are on their own. So we know that that's an important thing, and just wanting to really maintain that social contact, but again trying to do it in such a way that you haven't just got loads of people sitting feeling like the Brady Bunch. having a glass of wine and not saying anything. So it's kind of, you're too young for the Brady Bunch, but so it's how we can do that to maintain that social contact with people. That's important, and that's kind of what we're really focusing on at the moment. I'm working with Mark Rawson on some planning around what a recovery looks like, and we're working with the councils on that, as well as central government agencies, just to be able to get some cohesive thinking and making sure that that small business voice is always there as well, so it's not just coming from a higher level. So yeah, definitely involved in all of those. At the moment, that's probably the list of it, really.
Awesome. And I'm definitely looking forward to, and I know lots of people who are, contributing to those conversations and helping shape them as well, around what a response look like, and what are some of the leaps we can take as a region that we might have otherwise been handbraked on, where we may see investment and opportunities to kind of remove the barriers that have been there. I think there's definitely some exciting upside from the opportunities once we're through this initial phase.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of good work that was done, obviously, through the Te Taui Hu intergenerational strategy, and that still continues. So there's a lot of good work that's been done, and it's just a question of how can we sort of what can happen immediately now that still maintains that direction that people are seeking through that whole series of work that was done. So yeah, I mean, it's I was going to say it's exciting. It's not. It's kind of fairly daunting, but it's equally stimulating.
I think they kind of coexist, right? Like there's absolute kind of fear and uncertainty, but in that as well, there's a huge amount of kind of creativity and innovation already, bubbling away at the surface that I think is exciting for people. Where particularly where they've seen social inequities and environmental issues and things that that are also pressing and urgent and need to be dealt with, and understanding that we are in a time of massive change, and that does open doors as well as close some. So yeah, the new normal is different, but for us as a region and for us as a country, I think there are some pretty exciting opportunities coming on stream as well.
Absolutely, don't waste a good crisis.
No.
The new catchphrase.
Exactly. All right, we'll leave it there. That's a great note to leave on. Thanks so much, Ellie, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, take care.
Cheers.